Welcome back, everybody. Today we are prepping our levain to make our sourdough country loaf. So let's grab Gladys and go in with 12 grams of our starter. And we're going to do 12 grams of starter, 50 grams of water, and 50 grams of bread flour to make our levain. This we're doing the night before. So I like to set my day up to where I do this the night before and start the bread the next morning. So always start with your starter and your water first. Mix it up together. That way when you put in your flour, everything blends much easier. And so that was 50 grams of water and 50 grams of bread flour going in right now. So again, 12, 50, 50 is going to be our ratio to make our levain. And so we got 50, perfect. And now we're going to mix this up together until we get somewhat of a thick pancake batter consistency. And then what I like to do is just make sure there are no dry bits at all. Make sure everything's incorporated. And then I'll take my little spatula and just kind of clean off the sides so I can get see a nice window of growth of the starter and the levain overnight. And there's your consistency. It should be that kind of thickish pancake batter. Let's get our lid on, put our clips on, and this is not airtight, which is good. We don't want an airtight seal for our starter or for any of our levain. And then I'm going to put a rubber band over the top, mark the line where our levain is at so that we can see how far it's come the next day. Pretty simple. So we'll put this off to the side overnight. And now we're going to get started the next morning by adding in our bread flour. So we'll start off with 450 grams of bread flour here. I like to use an organic bread flour, but use whatever you prefer. And after that, we're going to go in with 50 grams of whole wheat flour. And the reason we do this is for flavor. You get a little bit more nutrients in your bread, a deeper color of your crust, and in my opinion, it's just a great combo to add rather than just going with 100% all-purpose flour or 100% bread flour. So let's just mix up these dry ingredients very well, incorporate everything, and we'll put that off to the side. So we have 30 grams of water put off to the side and 330 grams of water in our bowl that we brought up to about 95 degrees for about 35 seconds or so in our microwave. The reason we do that is so that when we put in our active sourdough starter, which we're doing here, which is about 100 grams, is it will break up much easier in warm water than cold water. And it'll actually help to get things activated as well. Cold water, you can do it with room temperature water or cold water. I just don't recommend it, as you'll be... it's just harder for the sourdough starter to come apart and to dissolve into the water mixture, which is what we want. So you'll see here, I'm going to start, after we get 100 grams in the water, we'll start mixing this up. And I just use a little spatula. You can use your dough whisk. You can use anything else. But it comes apart pretty easily after a few seconds. And you want to get this milky, not only color, but consistency to the water after the sourdough starter completely dissolves. And so we're going to go in with our 500 grams of flour and use our dough whisk to start mixing it up. Remember, 450 grams were bread flour and 50 grams were whole wheat flour. And we'll just kind of spin the bowl here and start to incorporate everything and get it mixed together with our dough whisk. And then after about a minute or so, we're going to stop using our dough whisk and bring in our bowl scraper. And so you can use a little spatula to get off the little bits of your dough whisk, put it off to the side. And the reason we'll use our bowl scraper is to get some of the remaining dry bits off the sides of the bowl. And it just has a nice curvature to it that helps along this process. So this is going to look pretty shabby, and it's not going to look great, but there's a reason. And you'll see off to the side, we have 30 grams of water that aren't in yet. And there's a reason for that. We're going to put salt in that and put it in later. But we're going to set this off to the side initially for 1 hour and do an auto lease. And we're not putting in the salt yet or the other 30 grams of water because salt can inhibit the fermentation process. And so we want to give it at least an hour to do an autolyse so that the flour can soak up the water without any inhibition from the salt. And so after an hour, we're going to do 30 grams of water and 10 grams of salt. And the reason we put the salt in the water is it just helps it to dissolve. We're eventually going to put this into our dough, and it really just helps the process along. So let's take our dough. Remember, this has been sitting for an hour already. We're going to dip our fingers and just put some dimples into the dough. And then we're going to pour the first half of this salt and water mixture on the top. And then we'll take our hands and just gently flip this over so that we can get the bottom side of this dough, where we're going to add some more dimples and finish off by pouring the remaining salt and water mixture. So now we have our full 360 grams of water into our dough with the addition of our salt. And we want to mix this together for about a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes, depending on how long it takes. You can see some liquid at the bottom still. What we want to do here, our goal is to just make sure we get a very even distribution of water and salt into our dough before we let it rest again for another hour. Don't overwork it for too long, but just get it to where you think, okay, we've incorporated it all, and I feel good about this, to where we're going to cover it back up now and let it rest for 1 more hour. So that's 2 hours total. And after that hour, we're going to start on our stretch and folds. We're going to do 3 total sets of stretch and folds, 30 minutes apart. And here's our first set. So we want to pull this up right to where you feel tension, do a quarter turn, and do the same thing. Bring it up. Once you get tension, bring it back down. You don't want to rip the dough. Don't want to be too forceful with it. So you're going to do 4 quarter turns, and then we'll be done with our first set of stretch and folds. And the reason we do this is to help build the gluten strength of our bread. Every time we do a stretch and fold, we're making it stronger. And so we'll cover this up, put it off to the side for 30 minutes. And now we're going to do our second set of stretch and folds. Again, I like to use water, and you don't want to add too much water again into the dough, but it does help to keep the dough from sticking to your hands. So we'll do a stretch and fold, do a quarter turn, do another stretch and fold until you've done a full 4 quarters. So we're just strengthening the gluten proteins in the bread that make that nice webbing that you see, that during the fermentation process, the gases that are released will get caught in these gluten strands and create those air bubbles that you see in the final crumb of sourdough bread. So we're going to cover this again, put it off to the side, and wait for another 30 minutes. And now we'll do our last set of stretch and folds. You can see little bubbles starting to form around the edges. So we're already getting to the point where the gluten is where we like to see it. And now you can do a window pane test where you can pinch and grab a piece of the dough and spread it to where you can try to see light through it. And if it breaks, it's still not ready. And this window pane test really can help you to tell whether or not you've done enough stretch and folds. And if on the third set of stretch and folds and you do a window pane test and you're not able to see through it, or if it breaks easily, you want to do another set of stretch and folds. But I generally find that 3 sets of stretch and folds during this process, if you're doing them correctly, is really all you need. So once you're done with your third set of stretch and folds, we're putting the bread to the side for anywhere from 1.5 hours to 3 hours. And you can see here the gas has really built up. The bread has risen about 30%, which is what we want to see. And Now we are going to start the shaping process. But before we do a full shaping, all we're going to do initially is get our bread out onto a lightly floured surface, and we're going to use our bench scraper to get it into a loose ball so that we can cover it and let it rest for 30 minutes. And this is generally referred to as the bench rest period, and really just helps the dough relax and allows the gluten to get prepared for the next stages of doing our shaping, our full shaping. So just again, kind of going around the bread, getting it shaped up into a nice loose ball, and then we'll cover it for 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. And after the 20 to 30 minutes, we'll lightly flour the top and turn it over, which now we're going to begin our full shaping process. And so we just want to take all four sides of the bread, pull it up, and bring it into the center. And you can start on any side you prefer, but we're going to just make sure we do all four sides here. So again, pull up, not too much, and bring to the center. And you don't want to push down too hard on the bread. It's a somewhat gentle process. And then once you've done all four sides, we're going to flip that back over again. And this is where we'll do our final shape, where we want to get a nice taut top part of the dough. And you can use your palms to pull towards you and to push away from you. And this again just creates tension on the top side of the dough. If you start to see any bubbles forming, you can just pop them. But we want to get some tension and flour the top part and get it into our banneton basket. So here we go. We're going to lightly flour the top and then get our banneton basket and put in some rice flour, which doesn't have any gluten. I think it works wonderful for this technique because your bread is less likely to stick to the banneton. So we're going to go seam side up, and this is an optional part of the process, but you can take the sides, bring them in, and just pinch them together to create even more of a tension on the bottom part of the bread, which is technically the top. And then we'll do another little light dusting of flour before it goes into our small trash bag. Some people use other types of bags for this. I find these small trash bags are just perfect. I seal it off, make sure there's air at the top, and put it in the fridge for anywhere from 12 to 14 hours, where it's going to do a cold proofing, which is going to slow the fermentation process down, provide more fermentation overall, which is going to bring us more flavor compounds, more nutrients, and it's going to help to pre-digest the gluten even more. So doing a cold proof overnight is really one of the best things you can do for your bread. Ultimately, it's a healthier bread, it tastes better, and it's better for your gut and better for your digestion. You don't have to do a cold proof overnight. You can do an ambient proof, and once you're done with the shaping process, leave it just on your counter before baking. But I like to do this. And so the next morning, I will preheat my oven to about 480, heat the Dutch oven for about 30 minutes before putting our bread in. So it's a hot Dutch oven, and I'm adding ice to the underside of the parchment paper. And this is going to create steam. And the steam is going to help our bread rise in the Dutch oven. I'm going to spray the top, which will also provide an additional amount of steam, but will also give us that traditional blistered crust on the sourdough, which is the key to a good artisanal loaf. Drop the temperature down to 450, bake for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then take the top off and bake for another 25 to 30 minutes or until you get your desired color. Beautiful color. Now the scoring could have been a little better, but ultimately we got a really good rise, and this is a nice looking loaf. Absolutely delicious looking. Let's get it cut up. And here you can see the blistering on the crust that I was telling you about. That is a sign of a good artisanal loaf, and that is accomplished in part by spraying on the top. You don't have to do that. It's just something I like to do. So let's cut into this and get a look at our crumb. And you do want to wait for at least 2 hours before cutting into this. It's very tempting to want to cut right into your bread after it comes out of the oven. But if you do that, you will regret it. There we go. Nice, beautiful crumb. You want to see some of those large holes, but they're evenly distributed, and it's just a perfectly delicious crumb that is fluffy and smells wonderful, is perfect. You can eat it just like this, dip it in some olive oil, or toast it up. Now, every time I bake bread, I'll do a point here where I'll analyze it. I'll give it a smell test. I'll taste the crumb. I'll taste the crust, and just overall think, could I have done better here? What could I do better next time? I think ultimately a better score on the top, but it didn't really affect the bread. The bread's perfectly fine, and I want to toast some up and give it the buttered toast test. So I like to try it untoasted, but then I also like to try it with a little butter to see how does this taste. Little jam, whatever you want to do is perfectly fine. There's just nothing like making your own bread at home. The house smells amazing, and you really are doing basically a science experiment making sourdough bread, and it's just a very rewarding experience, and I hope you guys all get to try it. And now the last step is just going to be getting the bread into our bread bag. Some people, you can use beeswax, you can use plastic wrap, you can use a bread box. I just like these little bread bags. They've always worked. I put this on our counter and we eat the bread within anywhere from 3 to 5 days, and it's perfectly fine just sitting on the counter that way. You can also freeze individual slices or the entire loaf to make it last for months. We generally don't do that, but it is an option. And we always will put a date there just showing, okay, this is the day I made it. I don't want to go too long, but just perfectly packaged up bread, and I appreciate you watching.